All right, I think we might as well start. Good evening, everyone. We are delighted to have you join us for what I'm confident you will find as a very informative evening. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners in the country from where all our participants join us today. And I would like to extend our respect to elders past and present, other Aboriginal people, and the spirits and ancestors of the clans that have lived in these areas. Now, over the last year, I guess we've all got used to the new way of life, so you might be very, very familiar with Zoom as such. But just in case if you're not, and you're having any kind of technical difficulties, may I request you to just use the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen, to just reach out, and I'll try to assist you in any way that I can. For everyone else, and yeah, please use the Q&A function for your questions. As my wife says, I really can't multitask, so it does become a little difficult looking out for questions in two different screens. So if you could use the Q&A function for the questions, it is likely that your questions would be answered in the course of the presentation. And as we're mindful of the 1 hour time frame that we have, we will try and keep the Q&A session for last. Brent can then answer the questions which are not covered in the presentation. As and when any questions do get answered, I will mark them as answered live. So if you do have any further questions relating to it, please feel free to answer that in addition to what you have. I would also take this opportunity to inform you about the Council's Smart Units program. There's some familiar names there, so some of you might be familiar with the program. Apologies for the repetition. But the program supports apartment blocks in Ku-ring-gai LGA through rebates of up to about $4,000 towards various energy efficiency upgrades. We are looking to broaden the scope of the program in the next rollout, and that would include shared solar that Brent will talk to you a little about in his presentation. But just be aware that I will provide you a copy of Brent's presentation as well as links to the Smart Units program in a follow-up email. There will be a link to a survey, and it's just a minute-long survey. I would encourage you to please put it because your feedback is very, very useful for us. So let me introduce you, Brent. Brent Clark is the founder of Wattblock, which is an environmental consultancy firm that specializes in energy and financial technology. His work has taken him all over the world. So he has worked with the US, UK, Middle East, Far East, China, India, and now Australia. So he's worked with, well, various government organizations, namely New South Wales government as well as Queensland. And currently through Wattblock, he helps a lot of councils deliver energy efficiency programs for apartment blocks. Now, his experience obviously is a lot to do with retrofitting existing apartments, where you're looking at, putting in solar, putting in EVs, or even generally doing any kind of lighting upgrades and looking for opportunities that you could help you reduce your energy consumption. So he's the man for all your questions. I wouldn't delay any further, but I'll pass it on to Brent for his presentation. Thank you, Brent.
Thanks, Anuj, and thanks, Karen, for organising this session tonight. And we'll be covering solar and NABERS for Strata apartment buildings. And don't worry, we'll cover what NABERS is when we get down to that a little bit further in. So here are a couple of the things that we're going to cover. We're going to look at the whole life cycle of solar and the things that you've got to consider for your apartment building, to consider a number of different models of solar that can potentially go on your strata building. We're going to talk about the New South Wales government's recent sustainability infrastructure amendment to the Strata Schemes Management Act. And then we'll finish with the 6-star national federal government rating system for apartment buildings called NABERS, and connect that back to solar so you see how it closes the loop. So let's first get into it. On the slide here, we have a picture of ideally what all 340,000 residential strata schemes in Australia will become. We'll start having solar panels on the roof. We'll be sharing that into apartments as well as into the common areas. We'll be using batteries so that we can use renewable energy at night time, and other forms of renewable energy like electric heat pumps for hot water and heating pools. We'll be moving to smart meters and installing EV charging in the basement car park. So that's the picture of ideally where we would like to get all our strata communities to, which are housing 2.2 million Australians and 15% of households. So why put solar on apartment buildings? Solar is a clean form of electricity. It will lower bills. If you pair it with batteries that are coming onto the market and becoming more cost effective each year, it can improve the energy security of your building. And when we use the term energy security, if, for example, we've got an elderly resident on the top floor of an apartment building and you've got a power outage, you might be able to run the lift to allow that mobility impaired resident to exit the building during a power outage. Solar is a low cost form of electricity. It reduces our fossil fuel reliance, which is a finite resource. It cuts our carbon emissions. And in terms of something quite practical, it reduces the network demand on the electricity grid in Sydney. And it also reduces, by generating power locally, you're reducing distribution losses. So a lot of electricity is lost on the way from the Hunter Valley down into Sydney. And imagine you can generate electricity locally and you don't have those distribution losses involved. So some of the barriers that we've faced for owners' corporations have been the split incentives. So for example, maybe 50% of apartments are owned by owner investors and maybe 50% are owned by owner occupiers. That'll vary based on the individual apartment block. But those two types of people have a different outlook on the building. And so you've got tenants and renters inside the apartment buildings, and some other stakeholders like your strata manager. Some buildings that are a bit larger might have a full or a part-time facilities manager. So you've got a lot of different parties that need to communicate in order to move down the journey of moving towards solar and renewable energy. And it's easy in our strata buildings when we've got busy schedules, we've got our own lives to lead, working lives or retired lives. And it's easy for apathy to creep into strata and it end up being the thing that's on the back burner. But there has been some lack of information, and that's what sessions like this webinar put on by Ku-ring-gai Council are aiming to do, is to give owners and residents in strata the information they need to cut down that buyer information cycle that might be required in order to get to a solar solution on your building. Now, access to finance, it's not that it's actually a problem to get finance for strata buildings. It's easy to get it. Just because strata schemes are classified as unlimited liability companies, they're only able to get unsecured lending, which means quite a high interest rate in comparison with the interest rates that other people might be able to get. A few new buildings have some smart meter networks in them called embedded networks, and that can also create a barrier, but nothing is insurmountable. And today we were just having a look through, we're aware of at least 75 residential strata buildings that have solar panels and have made it through the process. So it's something that can be done. Now, the opportunity, as we said before, 62% of Australian apartments are in buildings under 4 stories high, and they're good candidates for putting solar on. So actually, the lower the strata building is, the less risk in terms of the installation, and also the less cost in terms of getting the panels to the roof. And if we take that a little bit further, 75% of our apartment buildings are 5 stories or under in Australia, which is still a good size for installing solar panels. And a third of new dwellings that are coming along are now apartment buildings, and they'll just continue to increase. They've already gone past townhouses as the second largest number of dwellings that are constructed each year now. Now, an important metric for everyone to have a think about in strata is And a question I often ask is, what's the interest rate that you're getting on your capital works fund or your sinking fund? And most people actually don't know when I ask the question. So if you're one of those people, don't feel that you're the odd one out. But when people investigate it at the moment, typically they come back and they're getting 0.65%, 0.55%. Occasionally, some strata buildings come back and say, actually, we get 0% interest on our capital works fund. So always a good place to start is, what's the interest rate that you're getting on the funds that you have sitting there as a strata scheme? And then we did this analysis for a building recently, a block of 100 units, and they were getting 0.65% interest on their capital works fund. And we converted the electricity savings from putting solar panels on the roof for the common areas back to an effective interest rate, and that would have been 14% interest per annum. So this is just a way of thinking about that. If you put solar panels on, they last for 25 years. So you're actually hedging a part of your electricity consumption for a period of 25 years. And as we know, the Liddell Power Station up in the Hunter Valley is scheduled to be shut down in a couple of years, and we're possibly getting a new gas-fired plant in New South Wales, and we'll be moving to more renewable energy. So in New South Wales, we'll be maybe going down the path that we've seen in South Australia, and getting a higher amount of renewables coming into the grid. So being able to hedge part of that electricity, it's a long-term investment, but it's a stable investment. Solar is something that a number of super funds invest in because it's very reliable. The sun's been shining every day for a number of years, and it can be predicted that the sun will shine on most days throughout the year. So that's a reliable investment that is superannuation grade in terms of it being low risk. Now, another question that people ask is, how can solar work in an apartment block? And most people have guessed you can put a solar system and connect it to the common area or house lights meter, and maybe cut down the cost of running basement, car park lighting, fire stairs lighting, lifts, etc. But there's an innovation from Melbourne, from a startup company called Illume Energy, and they've created what's called a solar sharing gateway. And this is a box that can sit in an apartment building next to an inverter, which connects to a single solar system on the roof. And then that box can connect up to 15 different apartments and share solar power equitably and fairly amongst 15 apartments. And if you've got 30 or 45 or 60 apartments, you just buy 2, 3, or 4 of these boxes and connect them to as many meters that want to be involved in the scheme, or all meters in the building if it's going to be an owners corporation job. So there is a new technology. We'll have a case study. We have a look at one of those in the right area a little bit later on. But we'll just go back to basics for a second. So some units of measurement. A kilowatt is a measure of instantaneous power. And a kilowatt is also the unit that we describe the size of a solar system. So you might install a 25 kilowatt solar system, or on a residential house, you might install a 6.6 kilowatt solar system. Solar systems make direct current, and that needs to be transformed into alternating current, which means there's some loss of power in the conversion. And that conversion is done by a device called an inverter. Now, the other unit of measurement is the kilowatt hour. So when we get our bill from the electricity company, the kilowatt hour is the measure that we see on our electricity bill, and it's a measure of energy. And the kilowatt hour is also the measure of the energy which can be stored in a battery. So battery sizes are usually quoted in kilowatt hours. So a Tesla Powerwall, for example, might be 14 kilowatt hour Tesla Powerwall. So as we move on, just keep that in mind. A couple of rules of thumb. So the relationship between a solar system size in kilowatts and the energy produced in kilowatt hours over the course of a day. So in Sydney, a 25 kilowatt solar system might produce 100 kilowatt hours of total energy over the sunny part of the day from 7 a.m. To maybe 5 p.m. in the afternoon. So the rule of thumbs is 4 times the energy in kilowatt hours per day is created as the size of the system as measured in kilowatts. Now, the next thing is, what's the relationship between the solar system size in kilowatts and the number of solar panels? Well, first of all, each solar panel is roughly 2 meters by 1 meter today. But panels of the same size may produce more or less power depending on their performance. So you could get a 330 watt panel that doesn't produce as much electricity as a 400 watt panel. So you may actually have, if you're installing 330 watt panels, 330 watt panels will create 1 kilowatt. So if you've got a 6 kilowatt solar system, the number of panels that you would have is 6 times 3, which is 18 panels in that solar system. And the newest panels that are coming out will be 500 watt to 600 watt. And some, to get up to those higher numbers, some of them will be bifacial panels where they actually catch the light on the front and also on the back of the panel to get the higher performance. So they have to be installed on a tilt frame to get that higher level of performance. So we'll just recap. AC-DC is a band. Solar does the opposite. It does DC to AC. Now, the next concept is feed-in. And I just wanted to stress one point here. Feed-in is not a government rebate. So a solar system generates a certain amount of electricity throughout a day, but it generates more electricity in the middle of the day when the sun's at its peak than it does in the early morning or at the end of the day. And the same solar system will generate more electricity in the middle of summer than it will in winter when the sun is lower in the sky. So in the middle of summer, a solar system might be generating more electricity than you can actually consume inside the building. And so that extra bit of solar energy is actually fed back out into the grid. And your energy retailer, whoever that is, whether it's AGL, Origin, or one of the 50 other energy retailers in Australia, on your bill, they'll have a rate that they pay you for any excess solar that you can't consume in your building that you feed back out into the grid. So that's part of private contract law, part of the relationship between you and your energy retailer that you can choose. And you can choose a plan that might have a feed-in tariff as high as 20 or 21 cents per kilowatt hour, or around average in the market's probably 6 or 7 cents for feed-in. But your energy retailer, at times when the sun's not shining, they sell you electricity from the grid. And so just always check if you're getting a really high feed-in tariff, there's a good chance that they're actually charging you more for money that you can consume from the grid when the sun's not shining as well. So it's not always best to go for the highest feed-in tariff when you're selecting your electricity tariff. So that's feed-in. There's been some talk about feed-in maybe being taxed. Is this a big concern? Is this a reason not to do solar? Not at all. Solar continues to drop in price every year in terms of the solar panels going down. And if you think of if feed-in is going to start to be taxed a little bit, that's a good reason to go and start thinking about buying a battery. And instead of feeding that excess solar into the grid, start thinking about storing it into a battery locally and using it after the sun goes down. So now we're going to have a look at 4 different solar models. We've just got a Strata scheme here in Chatswood that just has a basic 5 kilowatt solar system feeding the common areas. So that's our first model that we're going to have a look at. So we have a solar system on the roof, and it only connects into the common area meter. And through that common area meter, it can also feed back out into the grid. And when the sun's not shining, you still use electricity from the grid. So no one's talking about taking strata buildings completely off grid at this stage. You'll always have a connection back to the electricity grid. If your solar fails, you'll just be consuming electricity from the grid, so you won't lose power in your strata building. Now, the second model we're going to have a look at is individual solar systems for individual units. And this works best where you've got more like a townhouse setup or a townhome setup in your strata, or potentially like a low-rise building that's maybe just 2 or 3 stories. And you can, if you're an owner of a townhouse, townhome, or apartment, you can go and apply to your owner's corporation for the privilege of getting a special use bylaw passed in your favor, which allows you to use a little bit of the common property roof. And it doesn't have to be, you can be in an apartment that isn't underneath that roof, because in a strata scheme, all the roof is common property. It's not owned by the penthouse owner or the person on the top floor. You can put in an application, and if your strata scheme is reasonable, there shouldn't be any reason why you can't get a special bylaw passed in favor of you putting in a solar system, and that will be registered with land titles. And then when you sell your townhouse, townhome, or apartment, the right to use that bit of common property roof for a solar system will pass to the next owner of your lot. So this typically works best in the townhouse scenario, but it has been done in some low-level strata buildings as well, and the red brick variety from the 70s. Then the third model is the one I was mentioning earlier, using the solar sharing gateway from the Melbourne company Illume Energy. And here you can see a single solar system on the roof of the apartment building. The solar power comes down to the solar sharing gateway, which is connected to each of the apartment meters and possibly to the common area meter as well. Common area could be included or not included, depending on the building. And this solar sharing gateway measures how much of the solar power gets fed into each of the units. And it's got an accounting package that just happens magically in the cloud. And over the course of a month, it actually squirts the same amount of solar into each of the different units, such that by the end of the month, everyone has received the same amount of solar power. However, it's doing it in a smart manner. So if people aren't home, it's detecting how much electricity is needed by each of the individual apartments. And what it does is it will divert the solar that's being generated to the people that are home, that are running aircon at that particular time, so that they make the most of it. But the accounting makes sure that by the end of the month, everyone got their fair share of solar. And there's no impact on your strata manager or facilities manager in terms of taking any meter readings or anything like that. It all just happens behind the scene. And you don't have to change your existing energy retailer. You can, each of the people that are connected to this solar sharing gateway, different units can be with different energy retailers. One can be with Origin, one can be with AGL or Energy Australia, Energy Locals, Power Shop, whoever you want to be with. So it's not controlling you in any way. You can still shop around for the best electricity deal for your own individual apartments. So a great innovation. Here's an example of an apartment building at Warren Street in Ryde. And you can see here 2 of these solar share devices. They've got 17 apartments. As I mentioned earlier, each of these solar share devices can connect to 15 apartment meters. They wanted to include everyone into the solar sharing arrangement. So they bought 2 of these boxes to be able to cover all 17 apartments. And they're sharing a 25 kilowatt solar system together, which you can see. They have the 3 buildings, and the solar is just on one of those buildings, is large enough to hold the solar system, benefiting everyone. So the fourth model is probably just relevant to the newer developments. Some of the newer developments in Ku-ring-gai having what are called embedded smart meter networks installed. And what they have is a separate gate meter that sits between the national electricity market and all the meters in the building, the common area and the units. And those embedded electrical network gate meters can be set up to bulk buy all the energy from the grid and then distribute it with a private billing system. Most of the people in these apartment complexes will get a bill that is probably a lesser known brand on their bill, and everyone is usually getting the bill from the same energy retailer in these buildings, unless someone uses their power of choice rights to opt out of the embedded network, which they can do at any time. So the solar system on a building with an embedded electrical network can connect to the gate meter, and the billing system that's used for the embedded electrical network will just continue to function, and the solar will be shared through all the apartments, so it can be offsetting the cost of people running fridges and aircon and home offices during the day. Now we'll just jump over to Meadowbank. So this was a new development, 58 units, and you can see here a 30 kilowatt solar system on the roof, which feeds into an embedded electrical network. Strata committee in this building, after it was populated, voted to install an EV charger, which you can see down here, which is connected to the embedded network. And that means if you charge an electric vehicle during the day, you'll actually get solar powered EV charging on a user pays basis to an electric vehicle that's charging, in one of those two EV charging spots in the basement car park. So great example of an apartment building actually helping low emissions transport. Now we're going to have a look at two different payment models for buying a solar system. Before that, on the screen, we've just got an aerial picture of Avanti up in Hornsby. And on these two buildings, you can see a 51 kilowatt solar system that was installed on that apartment block up there. Now, the first way to buy a solar system is to own it outright. And this is usually the best way for a body corporate to go about getting a solar system. It's sometimes called a capital expenditure or CapEx model. And this gives the maximum amount of control to the strata. Now, you'll still have an energy retailer for your common areas of the strata. Sometimes the energy retailer will be the same party as the solar installer. So, Origin Energy Australia, AGL, they're energy retailers. They also do solar systems, but most of the time, the solar installer that you get for a strata building actually won't be your energy retailer. It'll be another, local solar installation company. Now, the strata plan actually pays for the solar system. The solar system coordinates the design and install. They process the government rebates at point of sale. And that rebate we'll cover a little bit more in detail, but you don't need to do any application process to get that. The solar installers that are Clean Energy Council accredited all process that rebate. And when they quote you the cost of the solar system, they're quoting you the cost that is net with the rebate taken off. The rebate itself will fluctuate in price. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But then the strata owns that solar power and can use it however it wants over the 25-year lifespan of the solar system. It can also upgrade its electricity contract with its energy retailer to get a new contract that gives you a feed-in tariff. If anything goes wrong with a solar system, you just call the solar installer under a maintenance program. Basically all the solar systems you buy now come with an online monitoring system. So you'll be able to log in from your computer or your mobile phone and check that the solar system is working correctly. Now, the second model that we'll talk about is called a power purchase agreement. And people have heard about $0 upfront solar. And what happens under one of these arrangements is the owner's corporation actually contracts with a solar installer who's also a financier. And once again, they'll process the government rebates upfront on the upfront cost of the solar system. They'll monitor the solar system for an agreed period of time, which might be 10 years out of the 25 years life expectancy of the solar system. And for that period of time that they're monitoring it and maintaining it, because they actually own it for that 10-year period, they'll fix any broken panels, fix any inverters that fail. But every bit of electricity that's generated off that solar system, you'll have to pay per kilowatt hour for that from the solar installer and financier. Now, all you need to do is make sure that the cost that you're paying for that locally generated electricity is just lower than the amount that you pay when you buy from the grid. And even if it's 1 cent cheaper than what you get when you buy electricity from the grid, that's still a win for your Strata scheme. However, whenever finance is involved, there's an interest rate somewhere, and you will end up paying more money for this same solar system over time. So where you have a capital works fund that has more than the amount of money that's available that's needed for the solar system, the best financial advice is to always buy it out upfront. But if you're not blessed with a capital works fund that's got enough in it for a solar system, you're still better off taking a power purchase agreement for a $0 upfront install rather than doing nothing. Okay, so what are these federal government rebates? One's called the Small Scale Technology Certificate, or STC. And this applies to any solar system under 100 kilowatts in size, which is basically covers the whole field of residential strata buildings in the Ku-ring-gai area. The only strata schemes that would potentially do a bigger solar system are new developments. There's a very impressive new development in the southwest Sydney at the moment called Edmondson Square, Ed Square, and they've actually got a 2.5 megawatt solar system that's been installed on that. But that's been there since day one, and that would be the type of solar system which would qualify for the large scale generation certificates, or LGCs. LGCs are not as attractive to owners corporations as STCs for these bigger solar systems, because you don't get all the federal rebate paid up front at the time of purchase. You actually get a drip feed of government rebates over the course of the next 9 years until 2030, when all the federal government rebates end for all solar systems in Australia. So what this does do is create a bit of a dead zone where no one really installs a solar system that's between 100 and 200 kilowatts. But as I said, basically everyone in a strata building in Ku-ring-gai will be in the STC zone with a solar system that's less than 100 kilowatts. And to give you an idea, the rebate on a 6.6 kilowatt solar system, which is common for a house to put on, is about $3,300 at the moment. Now, here's a graph that just shows for a 75 kilowatt solar system, how the solar rebate will actually decrease each year on the schedule that's laid out by the federal government. So you can see the rebate on a 75 kilowatt solar system this year is $35,000. If you, as an owners corporation, decided to delay 4 years, that would reduce down to $21,000. So you've actually lost quite a bit in terms of federal government rebates. And the next question is, are solar panels falling in price at the same rate as these federal rebates are dropping each year? And while solar panels have come down and they're leveling out, they'll continue to go down in price. But remember, labor in Australia for installing solar panels is not going down every year. So what's happened is the labor component involved in installing a solar system is now a much larger component of installing the solar than it was 10 years ago, now that the panels have dropped so much. So basically, you're better to get in early and grab that federal rebate rather than saying, oh, solar is going to be cheaper in 4 years' time. No, it's not actually going to be as cheap as going now and getting the system installed, and the performance is not going to increase enough in the next 4 years to counter the drop in the federal government rebate. A couple of other concerns for strata buildings: waterproofing. So a solar system lasts for 25 years. Waterproofing might have to be done every 15 years. So you really want to do the waterproofing before you lay down the solar panels. And keep in mind, waterproofing a strata building roof is much more expensive than the solar system. So here's an example of a $100,000 waterproofing job, and the solar system for that roof is only probably going to be $20,000. So important to do your waterproofing first if you haven't done it. Another question: is it possible, if we've just done waterproofing, to install a solar system without penetrating the roof membrane? And it is possible. Here is a picture from the ARIA building in Waterloo, where they use concrete blocks to weight down the solar system. However, keep in mind the cost of weighting down a solar system with concrete blocks makes the overall cost of the solar system about 30% more expensive. So if you're on a tight budget, it would be recommended to not go down the route of ballast weighted solar. And this is very rare. Out of the 75 case studies that we're aware of, only a couple have done ballast weighted solar systems on strata schemes. Most of the time, they're anchored into the slab, and that's easier to get a wind speed sign off from a structural engineer. Here's another issue with our 1970s, 1960s residential strata buildings. Some of our meter boards look like this. If your meter board looks like this, it's a little bit of a fire hazard, and we'd recommend that you invest the money to update this before you get into solar, batteries, EV charging, more induction cooktops, more air conditioning units for individual apartments. Getting panels to the roof. This can be a challenge on strata. Not everyone has a lift overrun and a fire escape where you can just walk the panels out onto the roof and install them. You might need some sort of electrical hoist, or in a higher apartment building, a crane to get the solar panels up there. And we do recommend that you don't try and get cowboy installers that hand them over balconies at the top onto the roof, because it's important to not bend those panels and compromise the warranty on them and the manufacturer's lifespan by doing, it's better to pay a little bit more and get them safely onto the roof rather than trying to save an extra buck, with some dodgy lifting methods. If you've got trees or other apartment buildings that put shade onto your roof for part of the day, then you might want to invest in microinverters or DC optimizers as the inverter technology. And what these technologies do is they reduce the impact of shading compared with the standard inverter technology, which is called a string inverter. The downfall of a string inverter, if you've got a tree that shades your roof, is when shading goes on one panel, it drops the performance of all the panels in that string. Microinverters or DC optimizers, if there's shading on one panel, it only affects that one panel, not the rest of the solar system. And from a maintenance perspective, you get reporting through your computer or your mobile phone at a per panel level. And so you would instantly know which panel was faulty, which cuts down maintenance time And also when it comes to any debris or bird poo or leaves that collect on the panels, you'll get per panel performance reporting, which shows you that this particular panel needs to be cleaned. And that's the new way of doing maintenance and on cleaning a solar system, is actually looking at the computer readout and then determining that it's time to get someone in to clean the panels. Another question we sometimes get is if you're in an area where your roof is seen by other buildings in a multi-building strata site or by other houses, what's the reflectivity of the panels? Here's a little graph that shows you solar panels are designed to absorb light. They all come with anti-reflection coatings. And so solar panels are actually providing less glare than grass or forest. So if you can see forest and you can see grass and you can see solar panels, you probably want to be trying to block out the trees and the grass because they'll create more reflection than the solar panels. Here's an innovation. This is the Sunman solar skin. And here's an example of it being installed on the side wall of a plant room roof of a strata building in Melbourne at Docklands. And this solar skin is 1/3 the weight of traditional solar panels. It can also be installed flat. So at this building, there are 87 of these flexible panels. They're also installed on the Maritime Museum in Sydney Harbour and on a train in Byron Bay and in a number of other interesting places around the world. Some people are asking about when it's time to replace the balustrades in a strata building, can you actually put the glass in that's solar photovoltaic glass? This is an example of a building from Melbourne where the actual glass is onyx solar photovoltaic glass. However, this is still super expensive and beyond the reach of normal strata schemes, but it will be coming down the line in the next 5 to 10 years. Some people have heard of Power Ledger from Western Australia. Here's Whitegum Valley. Here is a strata building that has solar panels and a big battery, and people in the apartment building all get a share of the solar and can store their share of their solar in their battery, and they can actually sell it to other people either in that apartment building or in other parts of the grid in Western Australia through energy trading. They can set the price that they want to sell their bit of solar that's generated off the rooftop. And that hasn't been installed in the eastern seaboard of Australia yet, but it will be coming down the line. The other thing is people ask about solar tiles. Tesla's now bringing them to Australia. Keep in mind, they might not always be as efficient as a solar glass panel, but they are 3 times the cost at the moment. So you really have to be, thinking carefully before you spend 3 times as much to get solar tiles installed. 4 other brands from Choice Magazine: Bristile, Nulock, Tractile, and Monia, not just Tesla. So you've got 5 options for solar tiles in Australia. Okay, so we're just going to have a look at the recent changes to the New South Wales Strata Schemes Management Act. So in February 2021, they updated the Strata Schemes Management Act to make it easier for apartment buildings to install solar. And the way they did that, by the way, it doesn't apply just to solar. It applies to anything that's sustainable, batteries, improving waste recycling, anything that's sustainable transport like EV charge points. All these things in a strata building, including finance, taking out finance for any of these projects, now only needs a sustainability infrastructure resolution, which is a bit like an ordinary resolution with a 50% threshold. And in fact, unless you've got more than 50% of people who are in attendance at your AGM or EGM that are voting against solar, solar will proceed. So remember, if people don't turn up to the meeting, that's not a no vote. If people turn up to the meeting and abstain and don't vote, that's not a no vote. It's just out of the yeses and nos at an AGM or EGM, based on unit entitlement, of those people that are present, either in person or via proxy, do you pass this threshold, 50% threshold? Otherwise, your sustainability project will fly forward. So here's an example. In April, an apartment block in Camperdown actually used that new provision to pass a sustainability infrastructure resolution to install solar and batteries and do it via a special levy, something that would not have occurred in 2020. So a great example of how the New South Wales government's opened up solar for apartment buildings. Now we're just going to have a quick look at NABERS. This stands for the National Australian Built Environment Rating System. It's a national standard for rating both energy and water in apartment buildings now. It's been in commercial office space for 20 years, well established. It rates shopping centres, hotels, data centres, hospitals, aged care as well. But in an apartment building, about 1,300 apartment buildings have been rated nationally since it was launched in 2018. It's not mandatory yet. At some point in the future, it probably will become mandatory, and we'll come back to why solar is a good idea for your Strata scheme because of that. NABERS is on a 6-star rating, where 1 is poor, 6 is market leading, and 3 is average. And you get separate certificates for both the energy rating and the water rating. Why would you do it for an apartment building? Rental yields can go up. Property valuations of the individual apartments can go up. And there's also an environmental feel-good factor. Even the tenants are happier in a cleaner environment. So in the future, you'll start to see NABERS ratings being put on the online property ads when you're selling your apartment. And we've just gotten a little bit of information here. The way you go about getting a rating for your apartment building is you get an independent assessor who's an accredited assessor, and you pay a government lodgement fee. And you'll need your Strata manager to be able to provide historical utility bills, and the buildings that are eligible for it. Any apartment complex that has at least 4 apartments, and you have to have at least some vertically stacked apartments. So no townhouses, no townhomes can get NABERS ratings. So just to close it off, how does solar affect NABERS for apartment buildings? Well, if we go down to the old gasworks site at Wollstonecraft, there's some apartment buildings there. And we actually worked out that if you were to put a solar system on this common area roof, only applying to the common areas of the building, it would increase the NABERS rating of that Strata scheme by 0.5 star. And then in terms of what would that actually do to the property valuation, well, all 100 apartments should go up on average by about $30,000 in property valuation for this building, compared to that building down there, which is a separate Strata scheme, if they didn't have a common area solar system on it. So over time, over the next decade, basically the rating system will start to reflect into the property valuations of the individual apartments, even when you're just doing common area solar systems. So a couple of resources just to finish on, and then we'll go to questions. We've got a solar training course for Strata schemes on our website. There's also a 75-question quiz for anyone that's game to have a go at that. And we've got over 50 webinars on solar, electric vehicle charging, hot water heat pumps, energy efficiency, ventilation, sustainability, that you might want to do some further research. So happy to pass back to Anuj, and yeah, some questions.
Thank you, Brent. That was very, very informative. Some good questions here. I'll start with the first. Is there, I'm probably going to reword it. I'm not quite sure what Evie was trying to get at, but I'm assuming you're trying to find a relationship between roof area and how many panels can can be installed.
Yep.
He has shown someone a 600-meter square of roof space, and they said they could fit in 80 kilowatt.
Okay, so let's
panels.
just use our rules of thumb here. So remember, 2 square meters per panel, assuming you can't just have the panels, totally back to back across the. You've got to leave some space for maintenance and things like that. But really, roughly, you could get divide that by 2, so you've got potentially 300 panels. Maybe leave some space, drop it down to about 200 panels, and then divide that by 3. 200. And yeah, maybe 67 kilowatt solar system, maybe 80 kilowatt if you don't leave so much space. That sounds about right. Yep.
Another question from Vishwanathan. Is waterproofing relevant for metal roof apartment blocks?
No, not really. The best roof to install on in Australia is ColourBond, and that's because you can just use a drill, use the existing screw points for the ColourBond, and put the racking system for the solar panel and screw back through the existing holes. So, unless you've got a ColourBond that's rusted, you don't need to go through the waterproofing problem. It's the best roof to install on.
Sorry. Can we get examples of well-written bylaws for strata rules over solar? Now, this is something that if you have access, I could definitely pass it on.
Yeah. So, in fact, if you just go to that solar training course and go to section 10 approvals, you can download some draft solar bylaws. If you're looking for an individual bylaw, special use bylaw, we've got 3 examples of those in our solar education kit for individual apartments and townhouses on the website as well. So, yep.
Another question. Again, I'm just going to assume this is what Evie's asking. Yep. Using the information provided on bills with regards to kilowatt hours consumption,
yep,
can we determine what size of system that we would need?
Yeah, so just keep in mind, if you just have the bill information, you've got to split that maybe in about a third to see the consumption that would happen during the daylight hours, to give you a rough rule of thumb. But what you can do, depending how deep you want to get into it, is you can actually do a metering data request through send an authorization form to your Strata manager, get them to sign it. That allows you to request the metering data from your energy retailer if you have a smart meter. If you don't have a smart meter, you can't get any better information than the bill. But if you've got a smart meter for the common area meter, you can actually get your Strata manager to sign that document, and by law, your energy retailer has to give you 2 years historical data within 20 days for free. And that can be used to do a better sizing.
What's the best installation angle for panels for most electricity?
Yeah, so look, it's, in Sydney, you'd be somewhere between 15 and 30 degrees. Remember, it's as the performance of the panels has gotten better, the tilt has, as the production per square meter has increased, the need to tilt it has decreased. So there are some examples where strata schemes are actually installing the panels flat now rather than on tilt frames. And that's still better than not doing solar at all. Depending on the orientation, just to give you an idea, if you put the panels facing east or west, you'll get, on tilt frames facing east or west, you'll get about 15% less production than if they're true north.
Another good question. What's the running cost for each year when you're looking at solar cleaning, inverter replacements, broken panels, etc., more from budgeting point of view?
Yeah, so people used to have like a cleaning budget each year, and now we actually if, for example, you're installing on a tilt frame and you're at 30 degrees, basically you get a self-cleaning effect from the rain on the panels. And then what we recommend to people is you don't budget for cleaning every year. You only look at the monitoring on the computer. And when you see the production fall, then call someone in to clean the bird poo off the panels or the leaves. So that's in terms of inverter replacement, you should be getting a 10-year warranty on the inverters now. So you've got a budget for inverter replacement at least once in the lifespan of the 25-year solar system. We have seen a Strata building get 12 years warranty on an inverter now. You could, you could get an electrician periodically in just to check the isolators and any RCDs and the grid protection. But that should be just a standard call out fee for an electrician.
What's the performance degradation of panels each year?
Okay, so the latest performance warranties are that after 25 years, the panels will have degraded by between 10 and 20%, or that, and depending on the brand and how premium you go on the panels, you'd be expecting to get, like, for an entry-level panel, 80% of the performance after 25 years, and for a high-end panel, 90% of the performance after 25 years.
Is there a list of accredited list of designers and suppliers to do a feasibility study, provide some ideas of costings?
So look, we're one company that does the feasibility studies. Also, we just posted another video yesterday, which is the top 30 solar installers for Strata apartment buildings. And you can find that on YouTube as well, if you want to go straight to one of those companies and get some quotations.
Are there any safety restrictions on battery walls?
Yes, so most of the batteries are lithium ion, so they're type 1 fire hazards. The best recommendation is to not put them inside the building or inside the switch room. It's better to have them on an outside wall of the building in a well-ventilated area. However, keep in mind, anytime anyone buys an electric vehicle and parks it in the basement car park, you've got a lithium ion battery underneath the building, and that is a type 1 fire hazard.
Jeff has asked to just share the
numbers,
the passive resolution.
Yeah. So, okay.
If you could just probably put this slide on and explain that one more time for them, please.
Yeah. So I'll just go back to that. Hang on. Okay. So of the people that turn up to an AGM or an EGM, either in person or via proxy, count up the unit entitlements of all the people that cast a vote. Don't worry about the unit entitlements of the people that don't cast a vote or abstain. Add up the unit entitlements of all the no's, and that percentage against the sum of the no's and the yeses. If that's more than 50% against, solar is defeated. If the no votes are less than 50%, solar proceeds. Okay.
What is the average warranty period for solar? I guess this would also depend on warranties of inverters, solar, and installation.
Yeah. So look, go something like this. Try for 1 year to 5 years on the labor of the installation. Try for 10 to 12 years on the inverter. Try for 25 years performance warranty, 80 to 90% performance warranty on the panels, but that's not a 25-year warranty on the actual panel failing. So you'll still only get a 10-year warranty on the actual panel itself, if it fails. Yep.
Jeff is asking if the council has a list of preferred installers. I'm afraid not, Jeff. We generally, in council, we don't promote any particular business or products. So we encourage you to actually source an installer using by visiting the Clean Energy Council website. So I hope that answers. Joe is asking, I assume the billing will still be on a user pay basis. So I'm assuming this is with the shared solar.
Yep, that's correct. Look, there you can get more complicated than that, but when you start talking to your strata committee and you don't want to bamboozle them, just say it's user pays basis. Look, think about the number of units in your apartment building. If, for example, you've got 15 units, you might want to do an owners corporation project and all 15 units get connected up, owners corp pays for it. If you've got 6 keen beans, you'd need at least 6 keen beans to make it worthwhile investigating a shared solar system that's on user pays basis. If, for example, the owners corporation doesn't want to go ahead with it as an owners corporation project.
C asks if the structural integrity of the roof be assessed prior to panel installation. Would that be a wise idea?
If you've got like an 60s or 70s tiled roof with wooden cross beams, yep, get a structural assessment first. If it's a modern concrete roof, the panels aren't that heavy. And also, if you've got one of those situations where you might need a lighter solar panel system, those flexible solar panels are 1/3 the weight of the normal glass panels, so you can also use them. Yeah.
Would waterproofing still be a concern for a 5-year-old building?
If you don't have leaks coming through, no, that'd generally be okay to. If you haven't had a problem since the day one with the developer, then you're probably okay to install and just re-waterproof around the new points.
Warwick has asked a question whether there would be any impact on insurance with regards to putting solar on a tiled roof.
Look, you'd have to have a look at your strata insurance, your particular insurer, just to see what they say about it. My guess is that most insurers actually haven't caught up with solar panels at this point in time, so there's probably no difference, to the insurance that you would pay, but that's up to the individual insurer.
All right, this is another very good question. So who generally do you see as being responsible for solar in the block? Is there some specific person assigned to monitor it? Does it have to be appointed by the committee or not?
Yeah, like basically we've got some buildings that have electricity monitoring devices, and usually they make the web login available to all the strata committee members. The person that puts their hand up for it is usually the retired engineer who actually just loves it, loves the extra data. So, if you've actually got, if you get solar over the line in your building, it's probably because you had someone that was interested enough to actually want to, take it on and feel that bit of ownership around it. So we call that person the tinkerer on the strata committee.
Michael asks, do we need a DA approval from council? As per my understanding, unless and until it is over 100 kilowatt system, you don't, or if it's a heritage building. But Brent, I don't know whether you faced any other issues.
That's that. I think the state government did that for all the council areas in one fell swoop. So,
yes, I will be sharing all the slides and the Q&As. I can get a hang on the Q&As, but I can't promise that, Vishwanathan. The question is whether we would be sharing Q&As as well as the slides. Joe asks, are there any panels hail resistant? I hear that Australian standard for panels only specify this for New Zealand, but not for Australian market.
Yeah, we haven't had an issue with hail damage on solar photovoltaic. We've had an issue with hail damage on solar thermal panels, but we're not aware of a building that's had a hail issue on solar photovoltaic.
And do installation of solar panels make your roof more vulnerable to cyclones and storms or heavy winds?
So there's a structural engineering wind speed assessment that's done, and basically it's up to that structural engineer to sign off on the solar system. Keep in mind, if you go with a big 3 energy company, AGL, Origin, or Energy Australia, they'd have that structural engineering wind speed assessment in-house, and they would just give it to you as part of their service. If you go with like a smaller local solar installer, they might actually get like an independent structural engineer to do that assessment for you. And the other one is if you're doing those flexible solar panels, they actually have something called a pull test, because those flexible solar panels are silicon down, and then basically they come and they do a pull test, and you've got to pass the pull test that they won't fly off the roof. So hope that helps.
Yes, Brent, that was the last question. I think you've been very, very helpful and patient with the answers. Thank you so much for that. I hope all participants have actually gained a lot from this workshop. So I do want to thank you once again for joining us. I will send you the presentation as well as a couple of other links if something else comes to our mind, but it will be shared hopefully by tomorrow. I'll have that through. So yes, in the meantime, if you have any other questions that come up, please feel free to contact me with them. I will be happy to get in touch with Brent on your behalf, and we'll definitely get back to you with some answers. So thank you, Brent, once again for your time.
Okay.
We really appreciate it.
It's really great to be
good.
here. Yep. Okay. Good luck on the renewable energy journey, guys.
Thank you very much.